Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Steven with Freeze Peach Gaming, and today I am talking about Season 2, Episode 1 of The Witcher, titled A Grain of Truth, which is based on a short story from this book, The Last Wish, which is a collection of short stories, and it's in fact the first book of The Witcher. And a little bit later, I'll get into the problems I have with the fact that we're still in Book 1, even though we're in Season 2. In fact, I'll get right into it. There's, at least so far, I've only watched the first episode of the second season. It seems like they're still trying to go for this sort of Monster of a Week vibe, like they did with X-Files back in the day, that were the more popular episodes of the X-Files, but they're doing it with The Witcher while simultaneously trying to have an overarching story that encompasses the entire season and will eventually encompass the entire series. But it seems to give the show a bit of a schizophrenic feel to it, to where we have very small, like the B and C plots of the show are trying to push forth this overarching story, where the B plot would be like Yennefer and Fringilla talking to each other when Fringilla has captured Yennefer after the Battle of Sodden Hill, and the C plot being Tissaia and Vilgefortz trying to find Yennefer in the battle, cleaning up the wounded soldiers, and eventually interrogating the Black Knight. But the A plot, which is what I'm going to mostly go over, is, like I said, it's taken from this short story, A Grain of Truth, which is also the title of the episode. It seems to miss out on the themes that were set forth in the book. The book is an inversion of the Beauty and the Beast story, whereas the episode just kind of misses out on it. A quick summary for the episode is that Geralt and Ciri come across a town that's abandoned. They're trying to find shelter in a winter storm, and so they go to a nearby home of Geralt's, this man Nivellen. They get there, and Nivellen has been transformed into a beast through a curse. He looks very much like the Beast from Beauty and the Beast. And Geralt begins having conversations with Nivellen, and it's revealed that he raided a temple, and that he had been cursed by a priestess of the temple, turned into this beast. And he's telling Geralt about how he's suicidal, and he's very lonely, and no one ever comes to see him, and he's forced to live alone as part of this curse. But they start hearing sounds in the house. He's like, oh, it's just my cat, and dismisses it very quickly. Eventually, they discover that the sounds they're hearing in the house is actually a Bruxa, a type of vampire. If you're familiar with the Witcher games, you fight a few of them, especially in the DLC, you fight a few of them. They're pretty cool monsters to fight, in the game at least. They have this sonic scream that blasts you back and disorients you, and they can turn invisible, and it's a fun fight overall. But Geralt then confronts the Bruxa in the home, and it eventually leads outside into the courtyard. During the fight, the Bruxa grabs Ciri, Nivellen grabs a spear, stabs the Bruxa through the heart, and what's actually a pretty cool visual sequence, the Bruxa, cracks her joints out of place, turns her head completely around backwards, and begins pulling herself closer along the polearm to try and get a hold of him, and Geralt rushes in and slices her head off, and, visually that scene was very cool. But then, Nivellen's curse becomes lifted in this moment, and he's a man again. And, why did this happen? And Geralt just says, oh, love and blood, which apparently was part of the curse that was said that put him into this state. He's like, love and blood, learned men have been studying it for years, and the only thing that we know is that it has to be true love. And then they move on. They just leave, end of story. Oh, he also reveals then that the reason he was cursed wasn't just because he had raided the temple, it's because he had raped the priestess. So, let me get into the summary of the story from the book. In the book, it's a very similar setup, except it's Geralt by himself. He hasn't gotten in touch with Ciri yet. Geralt by himself is traveling through the woods trying to find a shorter path, and he comes across two bodies. And one of the bodies has a blue rose on it. He continues along the path, comes across a mansion in the woods, finds that there is a fountain with a dolphin in it, and blue roses growing around it. While he's there, he also sees that there is a woman hiding up at a tree, and she has dark hair and bright blue eyes, much like the creature we see in the show. They actually did good on the visual representation of it, but I digress. Back to the book. And she seems very standoffish. She doesn't want to talk to him. And so he just continues to the house where the beast bursts out and tries to scare him off at first. But, Geralt is no ordinary man. And so he says, you know what, I'll invite you in. And he tells him his story. And rather than trying to hide the fact that he had raped the priest, he tells the story of how his father and grandfather were actually marauders and raiders, and that was where all of the wealth came from and how they had the mansion. And that when his father died, he was tasked with taking over for the gang. He was a very sickly and weak young man, and he wasn't exactly up to the task. And during a raid on a temple, the men had coerced him into raping this priestess, and she had cursed him and given him this new beastly form. But instead of it being a horrible thing for him, it actually wound up saving him from this life of villainy and destruction and greed, in which his men had left him, and he had resigned himself to this new life in his bestial form, but he had started noticing that he was stronger, much stronger than he was before, and he was no longer sickly like he was before, and eventually he had grown lonely, and a merchant had wandered into his land with his daughter, and he offered the man, hey, I'll pay you for a year with your daughter. And he did not force this girl to do anything. He just sat there with her, and eventually they would start to have dinners together. They started talking and walking together, and eventually on a drunken night, things happen. They have sex. And this leads to a reoccurrence of this happening. He begins paying off more people to spend a year with their daughters. And, when the year is up, he lets them go. And it's always the same story over and over again of they come in, they're scared and confused. Then they eventually become to be more gracious toward him, and they start to have conversations. They get to know him a little bit better, and then the confusion turns into enticement and eventually sexual arousal. And he finds that over time he actually enjoys his new bestial form. He's no longer sickly, he's no longer weak, and despite the fact that he's now this grotesque looking man, it actually appears that it's now works as an aphrodisiac for women, and they're more enticed by him in this form. And in his old form, they never cared for him. He was always shy and weak, and he could never get his words together, but he had more confidence now, and he actually enjoyed it. And before Geralt leaves, he tells him, I've been starting to have strange dreams, and I'm afraid that I'm becoming more bestial. And if you can't find a cure for my curse somewhere along the path, I want you to come back. If you hear of me becoming a full monster, I want you to come back and end it the Witcher's way. I want you to kill me, basically, to ensure that I do not become a monster that I would despise. So Geralt goes back out, and he's traveling along, and he comes to the realization through a series of events that the dead people he had initially found weren't Nivellen. They weren't some other creature. They weren't, any of the swamp monsters he had thought they initially would be, but it's the girl he initially saw. Now, in the show, Geralt immediately knows for some reason that this is a Bruxa, whereas in the book he initially thought it was a Rusalka, which is basically the Polish version of a Nixie, a sort of water nymph, a feminine creature that is very mistrustful of humans and typically just stays away from them out of fear. But he comes back and he realizes that, this was wrong. This must be some sort of vampire. And he starts questioning her. He walks into the home. She's on the dolphin statue in the fountain. And he begins questioning her, trying to figure out what kind of vampire she is. And eventually he figures out that she's a Bruxa, and they get into a battle. Oh, they had also, before I get too far, he had also mentioned to her, just putting pieces together, oh, you saw this as an opportunity for a mate. You thought that his monstrous form, you could start turning his mind. You're the one giving him the bad dreams, and you're trying to get him to become more bestial and more monstrous, so the two of you together can rule over this forest and destroy it in blood. And so they get into the battle, they get into a fight. Nivellen comes in and he tries to stop them from fighting, and she throws him back. She screams at him and pushes him against a wall. A bunch of timbers fall down on him. Geralt's barely able to stand by. She's so fast and so quick, he's not able to keep up with her, and she's slowly getting the upper hand while slowly getting more tired, so he's just waiting for the opportune moment. Nivellen comes in with a big pole, big broken timber, and shoves it right through her back, much like you see in the show, except instead of a pole arm, it's just a big chunk of timber, where she does the same, similarly, she sort of starts dragging herself toward him, grabs a hold of his head and begins squeezing it, and he's writhing in pain, and Geralt immediately jumps up and grabs his sword and slashes her head off. And in this moment, she dies. Nivlin's curse is lifted. And he's sitting there wondering, how did this happen? And that's when Geralt says the line of, learned men and wizards have been studying love and blood for centuries, and they only know one thing, that it has to be true love. And with this, you realize that this is the full inversion of the Beauty and the Beast tale. The Beast was actually quite proud of his form and enjoyed his new state, whereas the Beauty in this, the Bruxa, who appeared to be a beautiful dark-haired woman, was in fact the real Beast who was trying to turn him into a monster, and she had true love for him because she saw him as a counterpart, as an equal, as someone that they could build a life together with. In the show, they just say it's true love because reasons. And literally, if somebody could explain this to me down in the comments below, please, because I don't know why this Bruxa would truly be in love with Nivlin. All he did was, claim he allowed her to feed on him because he was, immortal, supposedly. Well, in the show, he was immortal. In the books, he never said anything about immortality and his bestial cursed form. But in the show, he's immortal and stuck in this form, and so he would allow her to feed on him, but he, just turned a blind eye to her going around and killing other people, essentially killing an entire village of people that I'm sure, if it weren't for his curse and being able to conjure up food and baths and the like, that, he would have been dependent on. But no, he just allows her to destroy an entire village, and I guess she's in love with him now? I don't get it. It's just confusing to me. They seem to have missed out completely on the theme, and I don't think I like it. I don't think I like so far where the season is going. I think it's going to be the same issue I had with season 1, which is it's some incompetent writing in there with some good performances. I thought that Henry Cavill in this episode did a really good performance, particularly at the beginning. I think one of the best parts of this episode was at the beginning of the episode when he meets up with Tissaia in the battlefield, and she says, Yennefer had sacrificed herself to save us all. She wiped out half of their armies in a single instance, but she died as part of the process. He leans in close and, was it worth it? And then, but as Henry Cavill's walking away, you can see, like, the emotions are coming over him, and he's trying so hard to keep a straight face, and it's a really good, subtle performance out of Henry Cavill there. And Freya Allen actually did a pretty good job in this. I think she's a good actress. But the writing just isn't that strong with this show. We'll see if it gets any better. I'm going to keep watching, but I don't know. I don't think I like it. Henry Cavill's really carrying this show on his broad and muscular shoulders. But I don't know. I'm going to watch the whole thing. I'm going to give a full review of it and my thoughts on it and where they do some failings and where they have some good things. I think visually it was a good episode. Like I said, the Bruxa twisting her body around and pulling herself down the polearm was really cool to see. Henry Cavill's face in that moment was really cool. Oh, and Tissaia, when she's interrogating the Black Knight, and she's saying, like, I'm going to pull every single thought out of your head, and you're going to be just a husk left there stuck in the darkness of your own mind. All of that was really cool, and it was a really cool effect watching her fingers, like, sink into his head. That, I could be wrong, but that seemed like it was a bit of a mix between practical effect and CGI. Either way, it looked really cool, and I really liked that scene. One other thing that kind of bothers me is it seems like a misuse of lore. Fringilla is talking to Yennefer at one point in the episode and mentions that the Mages Guild has a ban on fire magic, and I just don't remember in the games or from what I've read so far in the books, I don't remember anything of fire magic being banned coming up. Now, I did some digging through some forums, and in the book I'm actually reading, so I spoiled a little bit of it for myself. Potential spoiler alerts for the show as well, but I don't know, judging from this, what seems like a lore mistake, I doubt that it's going to happen. But at one point in time, Yennefer tells Ciri not to use fire as a source because its power can become overwhelming, and that she needs to be very careful with it. But the Brotherhood doesn't actually have a ban on fire magic. They just are using that for reasons to make, I guess, to try and create some sort of tension between Yennefer and the Brotherhood, or the Lodge, sorry, the Lodge of Sorceresses, that's what it's called. So they're, Fringilla's trying to turn Yennefer to the side of Nilfgaard and is using her use of fire magic against her so that she'll be afraid to go back. I don't know. I didn't like it. It didn't make a lot of sense to me. It seems like the writers are just making shit up, and I don't know. But it seems like there's small bits of the show that I like and broad swaths of the show that I really dislike, really just kind of disappointed with. It seems like they're just mishandling the material. I haven't finished the book series yet. I am on the second book of the actual Witcher saga, The Time of Contempt. And it just seems like it's really a mishandling of what the potential is. The fact that they're still, like I said before, going with this Monster of the Week style, taking from the short stories out of the first book, like they should have cherry-picked a few of the stronger stories out of the first two books, which are just collections of short stories, and used those for the first couple of episodes in season 1, and then gone straight into the main story arc. I feel like already at season 2, episode 1, Ciri should be, much like in the book saga, Ciri should be at Kaer Morhen, ready to leave and ready to go train with Triss. That's where we should be. But right now, they're not even close to Kaer Morhen. She hasn't even started her training as a witcher. She doesn't know how to handle a blade yet. She doesn't know the square root of jack shit, other than the horrible things she's gone through and, the survival skills she's picked up along the way. And it really seems like things are just dragging on. Like they're very visually pleasing. They're able to keep my attention throughout the whole episode, but it's mostly I'm just trying to pick out parts that I like out of this big mess of shit. Like I'm trying to find the one, gold filling that I accidentally swallowed while sieving through my shit. I don't know. We'll see where it goes. I'll be back in the future with a review of episode 2. But in the meantime, ladies and gentlemen, have a wonderful day and never be afraid to speak your mind.